I'm genuinely delighted to be kicking off the very first Risk First Stars of Software podcast with Dom Vogel. Starting this series with a cybersecurity expert feels not just appropriate, but actually essential, because security risk is one of those areas where theory meets very real consequences, financial loss, reputational damage, and human impact. And Dom lives right at that intersection. He spent years in the trenches, from senior security roles at First West Credit Union and Netcoins to founding his own firm, Vogel Security Leadership and Training. He helps training organizations avoid the kinds of losses that no one ever thinks will happen to them until they do. But what makes Dom really such a great first guest isn't just his depth of experience, it's how he approaches his work. He's a proper cybersecurity nerd in the best possible sense. He's curious, practical, and deeply focused on helping people make better decisions before things go wrong. And that mindset aligns perfectly with what Risk First is all about. And on top of that, Dom is just an incredibly positive human being. He's a great thinker, a great communicator. He's devoted to his family, his dogs, and yes, he's the owner of a magnificent beard. So Dom, I couldn't be happier to have you here to help set the tone of the podcast. Welcome to Risk First. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. That was an awesome intro, and thank you so much for your kind words. And it's good that we're recording during winter. This is my winter beard. This is how I stay warm during the Canadian winters.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just such a trademark now. You should, maybe it just gets a bit shorter in the summer, but it's totally in all your marketing and pictures. I think we wouldn't recognize you without it.
No.
So Dom, do you want to? Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say we should do another one this summer, and then you can see what I look like in the summer.
So Dom, do you want to get into it a bit and tell us about a bit more about what you do beyond my limited introduction there? Let's get into the details.
Of course, Robin. Like I said, I really appreciate the kind intro. So dive deep. I've been in cyber for over 21 years now. So I've seen it evolve from when it used to be called information security. Right? No one ever called it cybersecurity, and cybersecurity then has become a marketing term. But that's something for another day. But I've seen it evolve from it being a field where it was a handful of companies worried about it, and there was only a handful of security tools, to where it is now, where it is a multifaceted discipline, all sorts of different, sub areas within cyber. You don't have to be a tech person to be a great cybersecurity professional. It's amazing to see how it's evolved and become more intersected with people, with risk, with business, compared to its humble origins 25 plus years ago. So it's been really interesting to see that evolve. But where I spend most of my time, I focus mainly on small and mid-sized organizations. So to me, those are organizations that still really struggle with dealing with cyber risk. They're the ones that they're on the front lines right now with cyber attackers, hackers. They're going after small and mid-sized companies. Why? Because most of those companies haven't invested in cyber compared to your big enterprise organizations. So I love working there. I love working with business owners and executives in that space and helping them achieve sustainable and real security. Not just buying a tool and be like, yeah, you bought this tool, you're now secure. Actually building in a security program from the ground up. And like you said there, looking at those intersections of people, business, risk, data, and what have you. So that's where I spend most of my time, apart from growing my beard.
So that's great. And I think, like, looking at your posts and your portfolio, it seems like there's obviously the cyber risks that you are managing for your customers, or you're trying to help your customers manage for themselves. But really, I feel like you're trying to do is to be that like Sherpa and to try and lead them through the minefield. Because my experience of this area from my work that I do at Finos is that the cybersecurity landscape is incredibly crowded with different tools that you can use, different attacks and techniques that people will come up with and try on you. There's, also all the supply chain security risks. There's the sort of personnel risks. There's information systems themselves and transferring data from one device to another, and all sorts of different aspects to the whole thing. If you're trying to run a small or medium-sized business, that's a lot to contend with. And the devil is in the detail with this stuff, isn't it?
It really is, and what I often find dealing with, again, business owners and executives in the small and mid-sized business space is that they still believe cyber to be an IT issue. They don't see it as a business risk. They don't see it as something that they should deal with like operational risk or financial risk or what have you. They see it as an IT issue. I'll give you a real quick story. I was chatting with the CEO of a manufacturing company in Western Canada where I live, and I was talking to him about cyber risk. I said, "So tell me, what are your cyber risks? What are you worried about here? Like, tell me more." And he said, "I'll just go talk to the IT guy." I said, "Look, with all due respect, I said, like, if I asked you like what your top legal risks were, you'd be able to answer them. If I asked you what your top financial risks were, you'd be able to answer them. If I asked you what your top operational risks were or your top personnel risks were, you'd be able to answer them. You wouldn't say, oh, go talk to the CFO, go talk to whomever." I said, you need to deal with cyber in the same vein. It's no longer good enough for you to plead ignorance and be like, oh, that's an IT issue. Go talk to the geeks in IT. It is a business risk. You're shirking your duty as an executive, and or if I'm talking to the board of directors, you're shirking your duty as a board of director member by not understanding this. This is a business risk. This isn't the mid-90s. This isn't something, like I said, that the IT guys deal with, right? It's 2026, right? You saying that is a really crappy answer, right? You need to be able to answer that. And it shook him to his core. He said, you know what, I never thought about it like that before. He said, but you're right. These are all risks and needs to be part of a risk portfolio, right? So that to me is the biggest issue that I often face, is changing that perception or misperception or myth or whatever you want to call it, and giving cyber the focus that it needs. It needs the focus of the executives and of the board. It's no longer just the domain of IT or your service provider.
Yeah, I think there's a certain lack of glamour, isn't there, around cybersecurity? but at the same time, we're seeing so many more. It hits the headlines so often now with like things like CrowdStrike or Log4Shell or SolarWinds, stuff like this. It's always in the news. Some system goes down, causes delays at an airport or whatever, and so this is hopefully percolating up the org chart in the way. But I think you're right. I think the problem is this is changing so quickly that the org chart is taking time to catch up. And this is what I see in Finos as well.
Yeah. So true. And I mean, and again, this is still, even if you go higher for organizations that have a board of directors, right? You still see this fundamental disconnect, right? And, I had a chief information officer reach out to me on LinkedIn. He said, hey, I've been trying to get my board of directors to really understand that they need to be more involved in how we deal with cyber risk at the organization here. And I'm just really struggling. Would you be willing to talk to them? I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. So I flew down there and I had one slide. There was one slide on my presentation when talking to the board of directors. This was a fairly well-sized company. The board of directors were very well paid. They're all pretty much all rich people on this board of directors. And so I had one slide, and the slide was of a luxury yacht. And so I was standing there with my hands in my pockets, and I could hear all this, the murmurs and whatever. And I love a good awkward moment. I love making people feel awkward. And I could hear the murmurs of people like, well, what is this? Why is there a picture of a yacht? And finally, I said, so how many of you have one of these? And people are looking around, right? And they're like, what the heck? And we're talking about cyber here. So I see a couple of hands go up, right? And I'm certain that most of them had some level of yacht, and I did my due diligence. I did my due diligence and I found out more about these people. And I said, how many of you love having your yacht? Again, put their hands up, and I said, how many of you connect cybersecurity with your yacht? And people are like, well, what's he talking about? Then your role as a board director here, you are personally liable. If you are not able to demonstrate in the event that something happens, data breach, ransomware, what have you, your customers, stakeholders, what have you, they can come after you, right, for not fulfilling your fiduciary duty as a board director member. Because right now, I've looked through the board reports and everything. You never talk about cyber. All it really says is, we just leave this up to the CIO's discretion. I said, that's not governance.
Yeah.
That's not leadership. Your CIO needs more than that. I said that that can hold you personally liable. And I said, what that means is that you're at risk of losing your yacht here. When I said that, Rob, like, you hear a pin drop. Guy puts his hand up. He's like, I don't want to lose my yacht. What do we need to do? So I spent time educating them in terms of, here's the questions you should be asking, right? Again, this doesn't mean you need to be a cyber expert. Absolutely not. But you need to know what questions to ask. You need to know when to be able to call BS, right? You need to be able to provide oversight and guidance. That's your job as a member of the board. And so the CIO called me a few months later. He's like, Dom, the board has just been so engaged. They're no longer he said, if I give a presentation, they ask a bunch of questions. He said, before I give a presentation, and no one would say a goddamn thing. He said, you really changed their mind. I said, well, I had to focus on what was in it for them. And for them, it was like their yachts.
Got them in the yachts.
Yeah.
That's great. Are you aware of Conway's law? This is a guy who said that when companies ship software, they actually just ship their org chart, and the software will reflect the nature of their org chart. So one of the sort of things I riff on in Risk First is that the company structure really reflects the risks that they face. And so if you have a company that was founded a long time ago, the org chart will be reflecting that, probably that historic structure of the risks. But then things like cybersecurity should, if that becomes like an important risk, it should start moving up the org chart. And, in Finos, we kind of think that people should start having chief open source officers, because open source is now like 90% of all software. So why don't you have somebody on the board representing open source? And similarly, like, I think that's what you're saying with cybersecurity. And what I'm seeing, though, weirdly, is that we're now having chief AI officers. That's come about fairly quickly, because that is so visible in the media. Everyone's talking about AI. Oh, we need somebody in for that risk. Let's get somebody along to talk about that risk. And so you can see in real time that the taxonomy of risks that a firm is facing is changing. So I think what you're doing there is important work to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And to that point, I love how you talk about from an org chart perspective, because what that also points out too, that I find, especially with cyber risk, one of the biggest gaps too, is that it comes down to the ownership, I'll say, / acceptance of these cyber risks. And often, when there's data breaches or what have you, very rarely is it because they didn't have the right technology. Right? Most companies have enough of the right technology. It usually comes down to a governance issue. It comes down to a risk issue, risk ownership issue. The risks that often lead to these manifest in terms of these breaches or ransom or what have you, they're very well known within the IT and or security team. In fact, they're probably well known within the executives. It's just that they're what we see is a lack of formalization around this risk ownership and risk acceptance. And what you sort of see, and I see this in a lot of organizations, is executive thinks, oh, IT owns that risk. IT / cyber is like, no, we just point out the goddamn risk. You as an executive or what have you, right, line of business owner, VP, you need to own those risks, right? And that's often where I find there's the most friction, is in that there's pointing out these risks, and then someone being willing to say, yeah, we're aware of that, we're going to own that, right? We see the risk of the action of moving on that risk or not. Again, some risks are need to be taken, right? I get that, right? I see this with smaller businesses where they say, hey, you know what? We know that's a risk with that particular system right now, but budget site, we're hoping we can address it within 6 months. Great, that's fine. We've walked that through that. You're saying there's more of a risk if you overspend that money right now. Okay, who's owning that? I say that to the CFO. Are you going to own that? And he's like, oh, I thought the IT guy was going to own that. I was like, the IT guy's not going to own that. There's risk to own, right? So I think really, like I said, that goes back to something we were talking about earlier, is that this moving cyber beyond the IT domain, right? It's not for IT to own, right? It is very much, like I said, risk, and it needs to be treated as an enterprise risk or business risk.
What about, because you run your own business, you're sort of almost in like training and, thought leadership or leadership training, right? So obviously you are helping firms with their cyber risk, but as a business owner, you have your own risks to face, don't you? So what are the chief risks that you kind of worry about in your?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. The thing for me, I very much I structure my business in a way in which it's greatly de-risked for me, because again, I'm not touching systems. I never get credentials to my client's environment. I'm very much de-risked, and things need to be sent via email. I have a secure portal where that data is there for a certain period of time. I interact with it, and then it's set to die and disappear after 14 days, right? So I have consciously set up my company in a way that the potential nuclear blast is zero, because there's no radioactive material to blow up. I realize that's not true. That's not easy for every business, but for me as a one-person shop, that was the best. I'll say the most optimum setup that I could do.
What about like keeping up to date though? I'd imagine that like keeping on top of the trends in cybersecurity and more, because it's a fast moving area, right? Then it must be that must be an ever present thing that you have to think
Yeah,
about. It's like, how do I make sure that what I'm telling people today is going to stay, or how do I keep up to date really?
and that's a really great question. I mean, that's one of the things that drew me to this field 20 something years ago, was that it wasn't static. It's not like organic chemistry where, nothing has really changed in 200 years. But like with cybersecurity, it's constantly evolving, right? But one of the things that, as much as things have evolved, it's sort of the old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Hmm.
It's still very much, for a lot of organizations, it's about the basics. It's about doing them well. It's having conversations that, regardless of how threats evolve or technology evolves or what have you, the basics are very much rooted. Yes, the basics have changed. Like I used to, like many security practitioners, we used to preach the importance of rotating your passwords every 90 days. Turns out that was pretty shitty advice. But it's
Yes.
it's human nature that the more we learn, the more we need to evolve, right? I mean, doctors back in the 50s used to recommend, people were stressed, they said, oh, just smoke a pack of cigarettes, right? You'll feel better.
Yeah.
As we got more data on that, and we're like, oh, actually, we're actually causing lung cancer rates to explode here. We changed our thinking. We changed what we see as best practice. So that, to me, I think, is something that I know as a practitioner was hard for me early on to evolve my thinking. But as I focus more on leadership, recognizing great leaders evolve with their thinking, right? So, like I said, security evolves, and yeah, but like I said, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Put some of that radioactive lipstick on while while you're smoking the cigarettes.
That's right. Go bold.
Have a few of these pills that we've just so there's a talk that I did not that long ago with some colleagues in Finos, where we talked about the problem faced by really the open source departments in firms, where they're faced by, on the one hand, the amount of data that firms are processing is rising exponentially. The size of data centers is going up exponentially. The amount of compute they're doing exponentially. The amount of CVEs they're facing is increasing exponentially. The amount of NPM packages that they might be ingesting and downloading and having available to their staff is also going up at some exponential rate. Similarly, like attacks from outside their organization, the way firms are like probing their defenses and testing them and using all these new tools like AI and whatever else to try and break in and gain entry is also increasing at a clip. But yet the staff at the firms is remaining static or reducing, that we're not giving birth to enough new software developers. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that. That seems to me like we're kind of running to stand still in a way to keep up with this stuff that is accelerating beyond our abilities.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you raised some really good points there, Rob. Like, I mean, one thing is, as a field, cybersecurity is seen as a very, I'll say, attractive area for people to apply to, right? Especially with all the tech layoffs we've been seeing over the past few years. We're seeing a lot of people trying to get into the cyber field, and there are lots of great opportunities, lots of great job openings, and we're seeing a lot of, I'll say, compounding problems, right? In terms of why aren't more people getting into the field, right? We keep hearing, oh, we have all these opportunities, but there are not enough talented people out there to fill these roles. In the security field, we're very much, I'll say, shooting ourselves in the foot in that regard. So one of the problems is that there's a lot of gatekeeping still in security. Again, it's generally with the, I'll say, an older demographic that is the, hey, you know what, unless you worked in IT, you're not good enough to work in security. We're preventing great talent from getting into the field through a lot of that gatekeeping. And I hear that a lot from a lot of people I talk to, and they'll say, oh, we've had this job open for 6 months, can't find anyone. But you look to what they're looking for a goddamn unicorn. These people don't exist. They say there's a talent shortage. No, there's not. There's a shortage of unicorns, I'll give you that. But there's no shortage of great talented people who, if you take the time to coach them and build them up, it would be absolutely terrific. I find it very personally frustrating when I hear people saying, oh, there's a talent shortage and all that. There's not. There's a shortage of good leaders who will say, hey, but we need to overhaul the entire hiring process. It's broken. Or it makes sense for if this was 1998, right? Yes, for all these. The thing that always gets me is hey, you know what? Yeah, we need someone who has 10 years of experience in this piece of technology, and that piece of technology has only been around for a year and a half, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
that level of stupidity is so rife, right, within the industry, right? And so a lot of these are problems that they're self-manifesting, right? The other thing too that we're seeing is hiring managers are extremely overwhelmed with the sheer number of candidates that are applying. And so when job openings are out there, they're being overwhelmed, right? Even um, smaller opportunities. I had one of my clients, they're in northern British Columbia. So I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This particular one was in northern British Columbia, so a fairly remote area, and for a very small college. And they were posting for a junior security analyst. They had over 500 applicants. 500 for this small college in really the middle of nowhere, right? You put these
Yeah.
applications in metro areas, they're seeing thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of applications. They're being overwhelmed. I'm hearing security managers and hiring people saying that, you know what, we don't even bother when looking at the stuff that's coming online. Even if we put in the AI filtering tools or what have you, and most of them are garbage anyway. It's just we're not able to go through this process. So what I'm hearing is a lot of hiring managers are leveraging their network. They are going to people that they know and say, hey, you know what, we're hiring for this job. You know anyone? And for anyone listening, something I always tell people when they reach out to me, they're like, hey, you know what? I spend weeks or months applying online. And I said, you know what? That's literally like firing your resume into a black hole. And so people wanting to get into the field, it's not applying online. You need to network. It's very much who knows you in this day and age, especially in something like cyber. If you want to get into this field, you need people to know who you are.
You know what? This is really good advice, because whenever I talk to people about this, is a two-sided problem, right? Whenever I talk to people about this, they're always saying, oh, I'm sending hundreds of CVs out. I'm sending cover letters, personalized cover letters. I'm going through filling in forms. And then when I talk to the hiring people, they're always like, well, we're receiving thousands of CVs for this role and we don't know how to sort through them, and we have to close them. So that whole process is kind of it's not fit for purpose anymore, really, is it? The whole CV back and forth. And I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think we need the new way to do this, you're right, is probably to go and network, turn up to events and conferences and classes and things like this, perhaps.
Absolutely. And even platforms like LinkedIn, building a brand, posting about security or what have you, right? Interacting with people online, right? A lot of hiring managers who will just they're posting online and they're looking to see who's engaging with their post, right? And if they see the person is in security, they'll reach out to them. It's stuff like that, right? Like that. It's both in the virtual world and from a physical perspective as well. It's important to build out that brand of who knows you.
Right, and this is probably kind of a special case because I'm on GitHub all day long, but like people will just email me based on GitHub and say, oh, do you fancy talking to this guy who's running this company? Because we're looking for somebody who's got this skill and what have you. And again, so the idea that you can put stuff on it, you can open source some of your work and people will see it, and then you can find work through that as well. And probably
Absolutely.
a combination of, probably not so many people have got a GitHub profile like mine, but if you've got a combination of these things happening and you get friendly with the right recruiters, then you're probably going to jump to the front of the queue.
Absolutely. Right. And that's why, like I said, it's just go beyond. I hear so many people, and like I said, I'm empathetic to the fact, especially in tech, we've had so many people laid off for the past couple of years here, but just sitting and spending hours a day firing your resume online. Like I said, you're literally wasting time. That is the biggest time waste right now.
Yeah, the channel is flooded. This is communication risk, as I see it. There's too much noise for any signal to get through. So
exactly.
So you've got to try a different approach. Yeah, this is good advice. I'm going to ask you. This is a difficult question, but I want to tackle this, right? Because I think this is where we get into the nuts and bolts of the whole risk management approach, right? So can you tell us about like maybe the biggest disaster you've seen? I don't want to know the name of the company or anything like that, but just talk in general terms about some enormous disaster that you've had witness to, and we can like try and pick it apart and understand what the risks were and why it got so bad. That'd be fun.
Yeah. For me, I'll say the biggest one was an organization called me. They were I'll say that they're in the construction space, and they said, "Hey, you know what? We're just dealing with ransomware right now. Our systems have been offline for 3 days. Businesses halted here. We have some really important files that we need to be able to, in order for us to keep moving forward from an approval perspective, we need to get some files to this particular city where we're building doing this building. Like this is instrumental, you know." And so I got on the phone, you know, with the CFO there, and was chatting with him, and I said, "Okay, well, walk me through this." I said, like, "Have you guys, what's in place, like backups, or, you know, did you have any plans for how to deal with it?" And he said, "No, we just never, we thought we were too small. I thought we were small. The target won't come after us. So we never really planned for any of this." And, okay, well, what does your IT team have to say? Like, are there any? You mentioned that this particular file here you need to be able to get access to. Like, where is it? He said, "Well, you know, our IT guy, he's a great hire. You know, he's the, you know, the brother-in-law of the CEO." Yeah, that's something I hear all the time. But, and I said, "Okay, so if he's so great, well, why don't you have those files?" He said, "I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure." And I said, "How about you talk to him?" So I called up the IT guy, also known as the CEO's brother-in-law, and I said, "Where? Tell me about the backup situation here. Like, how is important data being backed up here?" And he started saying, "Oh yeah, we got the state-of-the-art backup architecture and blah 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 blah." And I said, "Look, I'm really confused. I said, you're telling me it's state-of-the-art, but the CFO said that they're unable to access the critical files that they need." And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, we never actually tested the backup." And I was like, "Uh-huh." And I said, "So when is the last good data?" So I was talking to him in October, of this particular year. And I said, "Well, when's the last good data backup?" He said, "The last good data we have is from February." I was like, "That's a friggin' long time."
Wow.
So long story short, there, they couldn't recover that data. This was a file they tried desperately to manually recreate. They didn't make it in time from a deadline. As a result, there was millions of additional dollars that they had to pay in late fees and what have you to city. Again, I'm not an expert in how construction works, but it ended up costing them a boatload of money, and that's not just in terms of recovering and rebuilding their systems, right? And so when I checked back with them, and then they bring me on to help build out a security team for them. One of the first things I said was, you need to have a proper IT team, right? It's not good enough to have the brother-in-law, the CEO, do it off the side of his desk, right? So it was a very painful lesson for them to learn, but that's probably one of the worst I've ever seen, because, like I said, it ended up costing millions and millions of dollars for them, like in both direct and indirect costs.
Wow. Yeah. I was imagining you were going to come up with some quite complicated story, but this,
No,
you know, like but actually
no,
this
no
is
James
pretty
Bond stories
prosaic
from me.
stuff, isn't it? I mean, so
Like you said,
just to give you a bit,
it's not sexy. It's not sexy, but so many companies aren't doing it, right? And that's what I
it's
like to say,
yeah,
is that these are all preventable problems. That's
yeah,
why one of my biggest pet peeves is when I hear about the term sophisticated cyber attacks. For the majority of people, the majority of companies, the term sophisticated cyber attack is bullshit, right? I'm not talking about nation state or, you know, the country to country stuff. That's a whole other
that
payment.
is sophisticated. Yeah,
I don't play in that
Stuxnet.
pool.
Yeah,
But the majority of people, they don't fall victim to sophisticated attacks. It's the basic stuff, right? It's to me, it's like back in the day, before, hundreds of years ago, people would die from just very simple diseases that are easily cured nowadays, right? Because we didn't have modern medicine or modern sanitation or what have you. It's basic shit. We just need to do it.
yeah. This is basic sanitation, isn't it? Keeping
It's
backups.
basic digital sanitation. Yeah.
Yeah, I just I spent the first while I was at university, I did a sandwich year where you go out and work in industry. And so I worked as a sort of an administrator at Hewlett Packard, and spent a lot of time rotating backup tapes and testing backup tapes and making sure that we actually had recent backups of all of the software and stuff that they were working on. So it's kind of a very familiar example for me, that. I mean, yeah, so at the basic level, there's an implement. They had a backup system, right? But it didn't work.
Yeah.
So this was an implementation risk problem, right? Where there was, because they hadn't tested it, like fire drilled or whatever you like to call it, rehearsed what would happen. They'd never found out about the implementation risk that was right in front of them. And yet,
Exactly.
and then going there one level deeper, as you said, like they'd hired someone's best friend's brother, whatever, And, that's just that person's lack of awareness of the risks, the fact that they didn't have the knowledge of those risks and the basic ideas of the risks entailed, that's why things went wrong here, isn't it? I think.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, this misperception around, again, this was a fairly large company. There was no reason why they couldn't have had an IT team in there. It didn't need to be, the brother-in-law of the CEO, right? But it went back to the fact that the CEO believed that IT, that's not important. Cyber, that's not important. Right? Let some tech geek deal with it. It's not important. More, if I go back to root cause, is the fact that the CEO did not understand fundamentally that this is a business risk, that this isn't just some willy-nilly tech shit that you just deal with. It is a risk, right? So that to me is the problem, is that we still have far too many executives, especially like you said, in the small and mid-sized business space, who equate cyber with being tech and geek stuff. It's not.
Yeah, well, I think we still, to a certain extent, so I deal with kind of much larger companies than you're talking about, I think, but I think we still have that tendency there as well, where, I've been in conversations with people who've said to me, well, Rob, we're not a software company, we're a bank. And this to me is completely wrong-headed, because you actually are a software company that just happens to deal with money, much like Spotify is a software company that happens to deal with music.
Yeah.
And Google's a software company that happens to deal with advertising. And, it's software companies all the way down. Amazon is a software company that just happens to send you books and parcels every day or week or whatever. The fact all these big firms have pivoted to software, and again, maybe that transformation isn't apparent to all the people in the organization, but it has nevertheless happened, and that is a source of a model risk there, isn't it? Because they need to update their internal model to realize that actually, yes, we are a software company.
Absolutely. It's to your point there. I think it's the mindset shift, right? I dealt with this. It was a porta potty company, right? So portable toilets.
Oh wow!
Right?
Okay.
That they called and they said we have a ransomware issue, right? And at the end of the day, like again, we live in a digital age, right? There's no such thing as non-technical companies now, right? Every company is, and even if you want to say you're not a tech company, fine, but you're deeply reliant on technology, right? I would argue that every company is a tech company, but not everyone necessarily sees it that way. But to me, it comes down to, again, you're deeply reliant on technology. Every company has their key business processes, their key, how they fulfill their mission statement as an organization. It depends on technology, right? It doesn't depend on a pencil and paper. It depends on technology. And that's, I think, like I said, that fundamental disconnect still that we have with a lot of executives, right? If the company can't fulfill what it was set out to do without tech, that in itself, like I said, poses a big risk, right? So just framing it that way and say, this is a single point of failure. This technology, what happens if this technology disappears? And we see that, right? Like, see that with companies like Starbucks, right? Where I think it was last year where they had a big tech issue. All their main systems were offline, and people were like, "Does anyone remember the manual processes to do this? Does anyone have a pencil?" Right? Like they were losing their shit, right? Like it's, and again, I having come from the financial sector, the things I was incumbent there, especially at the bank where I worked, or credit union I worked, was if the systems go offline, does everyone remember? Do we have the processes documented? Right. So someone comes into a branch to deposit a check. Do people know, and is it documented, how we manually do that, and then how we can update that later once the technology is online? Went through that process. We found out the majority of people had no friggin' idea what the manual processes were.
Yeah.
Right. So it's so important, like I said, especially for organizations that have very low tolerance for, even if downtime in a few seconds or minutes means lost business and significant lost money. You got to make sure that you understand, okay, well, if we need to, if we can revert back to the manual processes, how quickly can we do that, right? And I think there's a lot of people, especially younger people, who haven't worked at the same place for 30 years, they wouldn't remember. So in that particular example, when I was at the bank, we had to rely on our oldest, longest serving teammates, because they remembered what it was like before we had any of these modern systems. They're like, oh yeah, this is what we do. This is what we do. Great. We got them all into the room. We documented all these processes manually, right? But again, as time goes on, those people aren't there, right? And that's why, like I said, I have good authority in terms of what happened in Starbucks there. people were just like,
Yeah.
what the hell do we do? Right. But they take away the computers and like, it was jungle law.
Yeah, this is this is dependency risk, right, isn't it? Because
Yes. 100%.
what we're talking about is the things that your business needs to run. And so it's got to be like the lights have got to be on and the weather's got to be not, snow up to here or whatever. But and then if you right, I guess the point is that if you accept that your business requires the internet and requires computers to run, then that's just a risk you accept and you get on with it. And if it's not there, you're not doing business. I remember during I think it was at the early 2000s in the UK, we had like this fuel strike, and none of the petrol stations or the gas stations in the UK were getting any deliveries of fuel. And so nobody could drive their cars. Like there was a period of about 5 or 6 days where you just weren't able to drive your cars. And so the whole road network was essentially down. There was I think some kind of businesses were able to get, like farmers were able to get fuel, and that was about it. And I remember having this conversation with my girlfriend at the time saying, this is an absolutely critical dependency for the UK in a way that the internet and email, for example, isn't. And this was in the early 2000s. But I think now probably those two things have swapped around. I think you could, like, when we went through the lockdown in 2020, everyone was doing everything on the internet. I was working from home on the internet. You were buying things on the internet, really not traveling anywhere or very much at all. And so the balance of those dependencies in the last 20 years has completely shifted in my estimation. And the internet and connectivity, digital connectivity, has rocketed in importance, such to the point now that if I went to the supermarket now and the internet not working, I don't know if they'd be open because I don't think anyone will be able to pay for anything. The last time we carried cash was before the pandemic. Even if I go to like a jumble sale or a car boot sale, do they still use cash at those? Like, it just seems anachronistic. Even the buskers on the tube stations have like card machines now, so they can take a card payment for their busking. And so that's to the extent that we've accepted this dependency in our lives, and there's really I don't think there is a mitigation for that. We just we accept that if it goes down, then we're just going to not buy anything or not do anything.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's a really great story, Rob. And you're right. It's been interesting how that has changed over the past 2 decades here. Because like I said, when I started in the field, that wasn't the case. That dependency has absolutely shifted. And that most recent, massive outage that we had with CrowdStrike, where that was affecting everything from flights to you name it, right? That was probably the most recent event that absolutely signaled that critical dependency, right? So yeah, it's and I think, like I said, it comes still down to that level of informing leaders, informing people who are business leaders, and so that they truly understand that. Because like I said, I think, yes, it's a dependency, but I truly believe that that's not well understood in the leadership circles, especially among executives. I really don't feel that is truly understood yet.
No, well, I think you're doing God's work in making sure they understand it. That's kind of the idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to just touch on was that, so obviously the idea of Risk First, the book, is to teach software developers about risk and trying to get them into this risk mindset. And it's strange because I feel like in cybersecurity, this is how you've been thinking for at least a decade, maybe more, about risk. And if I look at tools like MITRE, the MITRE attack framework, things like that, where they're trying to catalog different techniques and then the ways that systems are attacked and the controls you need to put in place, or OWASP, where they're like cataloging the biggest security mistakes that you're making in your applications. This is all kind of like a risk first kind of approach where you're looking at the risks and trying to code for those or work, do work for those rather than I think in the software development world, we've not really taken this mindset, and I think this is the change that I want to see.
Absolutely. I think that's the further evolution of security. Again, it's evolved from just being something that was integrated within IT, the people who put up the servers or what have you, evolved to having a specific team dedicated to cybersecurity, to now there being levels of integration with leadership and outside of IT, further evolved to the fact that different facets of the organization need to understand security, whether it be developers, whether it be procurement, whether it be legal, right? So now we're seeing this
Mm.
further evolution of security ends up being sort of embedded in most business units, right? Even things like the communications team, right? Thinking about, hey, we're using all these different, social media accounts, right? We need to make sure that we're protecting it, right? Let's put on MFA, right? It's been interesting to see that it's becoming something which is much more, um, I'll say, decentralized in the way that it's not just held in the hands of IT, right? And so that's been, I think, has been the most powerful thing, is that being able to take it from it, and it's something that we're going to change those perceptions of it being an IT thing to it truly being a business wide / organizational wide thing.
Yeah. And there's always new techniques as well, isn't there? So, attackers are always figuring out new ways to compromise individuals or systems, or, observing the way you're doing business and looking for the weaknesses in that and attacking that. So, yeah, so I wanted to turn to like the future then. So, how do you see cybersecurity evolving in the future? Where do you think this is heading? I've kind of already given my slightly negative outlook about how things are going, but hopefully you can give me a more
I,
positive thing to take away from the.
I, where I like to see it evolve is, where I think AI holds great promise, is that we still very much are stuck in finding the proverbial needle in the haystack. And you have so many security analysts who are spend so much time looking for those needles. We have no shortage of systems that set up alerts or what have you. We have what we have a shortage of, though, is high fidelity alerts, things that are right. Yes, this is important. You need to act on it, right? There's still
Mm.
far too much, I'll say, human inefficiencies in chasing ghosts down. The more AI evolves, what I love to be able to see, what I'm like the whole great promise is that by the time AI is going to be doing much more real-time monitoring, right? Having eyes on the ground on data movement, what have you, 24/7, 365. And by the time something reaches a human, it's like, yes, you need to act on this, right? It's not okay, this could be something, right? Spend, 3 days figuring out if it is something meaningful, right? That's going to lead to higher efficiency security teams. That's going to reduce things like burnout. Burnout is so much a problem in cyber. Why? Because they spend time
I'm not
chasing
surprised.
right? And like, oh, we spent 5 days chasing this thing, and it's actually not anything. Oh, that seems really demoralizing, right? And you can feel your heart being right, being crushed. That to me is where I think it's going to evolve. Right, we're going to see higher efficiency security and more effective security. Right, and as a result, the people in security are going to be able to focus on the more meaningful problems that need to be solved, rather than, like I said, chasing alerts, figuring out if an alert is a false positive or not, right? And allowing us to, like I said, truly elevate security beyond just the tech stuff and focus on it, making it something meaningful, and more meaningful business function in organizations. So that to me is what I think is the future.
So you would see AI as a net positive then for security professionals and the security landscape. Is that,
If the right
yeah,
people make the
for the
right
moment?
decisions, yeah. So that's my glass half full, right?
Yeah,
If the right people make the right decisions. So yeah, just to, and like I said, I really believe that that's where the great promise is. Is AI causing problems? Yeah, absolutely. Right. We're seeing higher velocity threats. Right. We're seeing the volume at levels that we've never seen before. Right. AI is allowing for a whole new level of automation. It's very much, again, there's a um, it is definitely making things worse as well. Don't get me wrong, but like I said, I think where the great promise is that it can truly transform how we've constructed security over the past 2 decades with sort of prevent, detect, respond, and focus 100% of prevention on AI, have 100% of detection on AI, and have most of the response even being on AI. We still humans being part of that
yeah,
cycle, but and that's like I said, freeing humans to focus on, like I said, the more pressing issues around cyber, and that's about truly integrating it from the risk perspective, right? Because we spend so much time on the tech stuff, right? And it's like I said, and I've done that. I spent a week chasing an alert and like, oh, this must be something, only to find out, oh, it was it was actually nothing on the false positive. That's really demoralizing, right?
yeah,
Right. And we see that so much in the field, right? There's so many uh, junior security analysts who spend days and days and days monitoring tools and what have you, and they just their eyes are blurring, right? They just it's so hard for them to do. And right now I refer to it as warm bodies on the fire, right? We see a lot of these companies that
Uh,
provide managed detection response. These junior analysts are burning out. They leave, and then it's just another. Let's shovel in some new people here whose spirits haven't been broken, and we put them in the security operations center, right? It's
yeah.
very much stuck in that vicious cycle right now, and that to me is where I think AI can really, really, truly transform security.
Yeah, I think they were already seeing this in software development where it's taking a lot of the drudgery
Yes.
out of the craft.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think on the prevent, detect, respond stuff, I think it's great. But AI, I have a feeling that we're going to see a whole new attack service over the next few years where companies are deploying AI into applications left, right, and center, and reaping all the security implications of that down the line. And people like you are going to be in a lot of work trying to educate people on the right use of AI tools as well.
It's an evolution of what we've been seeing the past few years with what is referred to as shadow IT. People can buy a SaaS tool online, a cloud tool online, right? And that whole notion of everything living within the IT moat, that got broken 10 years ago, right? And now we have shadow AI, where again, people can just be plugging in sensitive company data, corporate data, customer data, what have you, and no one has an effing clue about that, right? So is it a net new risk? No, but it's an evolution of a risk that we have failed to truly solve, right? Shadow IT has been a problem for over a decade, and now with AI, that's only further accelerating a problem that we've been unable to truly grapple with.
Yeah, that's very true. And a lot of times in my career, I've been picking up things that the shadow IT teams have been building and then trying to turn it into actual engineering or deployable, maintainable code, that kind of thing. We've got this spreadsheet. It's mainly wrong, but it's directionally correct. Can you
Yeah,
write a new one that in Java that works and has got unit tests and a proper upgrade cycle and revision control and all that stuff? Can we do that now? So yeah,
good
I can see
times.
this. I can see the conversation happening here. We've whipped together this AI. It's great. It does everything
Yeah,
except
yeah,
occasionally it gives the customers massive
yeah.
discounts. We want to stop that.
It'll be an interesting decade, that's for sure.
Yeah, yes, it is going to be. I wanted to know. So, have you got any advice for people starting their career in cybersecurity? What would you say to them then?
My advice to people who start in the field is to not just get mired in technology. I'm a firm believer that the best security professionals are those that, yes, understand technology, but have very good human skills. They're very good at communicating. They're very good at having a conversation with I'll just say a non-technical person and saying, hey, this is a risk. Here's why. So in a way that you're not using a bunch of acronyms that person doesn't understand what the hell you're saying, right? People who are really coachable, right? To me, the thing that I tell people who are entering this field is that the technology stuff is coachable, and that's table stakes. Where I'm seeing people being hired is not because of their tech skills, it's because of their human skills, right? So we need to
Hmm.
double and triple down on that. Learn how to be a better writer, and I don't just mean asking ChatGPT. Learn how to be a better writer. Learn how to be a better communicator, right? Learn how to be a better team player, right? Learn how to do a better job at presenting. That's the stuff that's going to get you hired.
Yeah, I think I would go along with that. And this is something I write about in the book as well, is like communicating to people outside of IT. It's like
Yeah.
one of the key,
Yes.
if you're working in an organization with lots of different disciplines, then one of the things I talk about is talk about your risks and try and represent your ideas. If you have a problem, then try and present it a bit like you did with your yacht, right? Try and represent this problem in terms of a risk that other people can understand. And so, don't go to somebody and say, oh, there's technical debt in this module. We're going to have to rewrite it. It's going to take 3 weeks. You need to explain, right, that this is dangerous code. It's an operational risk. It could cause delays or it could cause losses because we haven't tested it properly. Yeah. So I think these are all sort of like communication strategies that I think help people make their case. But you're absolutely right. And what about, have you got any interesting resources, blogs, books, things like that you can recommend? What would you suggest to people? I guess this is
Yeah.
probably all stuff that might go out of date, but
Yeah. for for me, I have a couple great resources. Again, security is again, it's so deep and so broad now, that there's so many different awesome resources, YouTube, what have you. But some things ones that I like following mainly because there's a tie to business. One is called darkreading.com and another one is csoonline.com. They bring forward great stories around, again, stuff that's new security trends, research, what have you. But they always tie it back to business. And again, seeing that's the intersection I like playing in. I love reading about those intersections and how that's evolving. So for people who really want to understand that, those are two really, really great resources. I think they're absolutely phenomenal. And if you want to follow one of probably the original security rock stars, his name was Bruce Schneier.
Oh yeah.
Schneier. I think his
Well
his
done.
blog, Schneier.org. He's phenomenal. Again, he takes stories, privacy risks, what have you, and he makes it super relatable. He's been doing security longer than I've been alive. The stories that he has and how he draws it to present day, it's incredibly inspiring thought leadership, right? So those are the ones that I frequently check. And again, depending on what you like, if you want to go down with certain application security testing, what have you, again, there's no shortage of great resources. If you're never not sure, and if anyone's listening here, or for those who are listening and want to know, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to provide some thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to say, where can we find you then? So LinkedIn's the best place?
LinkedIn is where I spend most of my biz dev time there. So feel free to connect with me. I'm the only English-speaking Dom Vogel guy in Germany who I think is in finance. But if you want the cyber guy who speaks English, that's me. So please, for those who are listening, please feel free to send me a connection, and they're happy to connect there. Or you can check out my website is vogelleadershipcoaching.com. Again, all my services and stuff are there, and you can reach out to me via my website as well.
You're better off than me. There's loads of Rob Moffats on LinkedIn now. I'm like only about I'm like about the fifth most famous Rob Moffat on LinkedIn. We're all starting to form a group now. We're all friends with each other.
That's awesome. It's like Steve
Anything
Smith.
else you want to? Is there anything coming up that you're going to be at, or you want to plug or talk about? Get people along.
One of the things that, like I said, that I'm very excited about for this year is I'm posting more of my stories on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So again, if the narratives and the stories that you heard on the podcast today here with you, Rob, if people like those stories, then they should absolutely follow me, because I'm really excited. And after 20 plus years, I have tons of stories. I've never really taken the time to share them and relate them back to just broader use. I usually just use them in my biz dev calls as a way of trying to get people to to close a deal, right? But so I'm really excited for at least the next 6 months. I'll be sharing daily, Monday through Friday, stories from the trenches. And like I said, if people find that inspiring or want to learn more about security, like I said, I'm really excited about that. So I'd love for them to be following me along on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you've got some excellent LinkedIn posts. You've got good LinkedIn game, I think, Tom. I loved your one the other day about having bought a new home security system. Can you tell us what that was?
Oh yeah, very very quickly. So that was for a
top of the line home security.
So this was a obviously it was a professional services firm, a smaller professional services firm. I was cold calling one day, and they said, "Oh yeah, no, we just bought a $100,000 plus. We spent $300,000 on a state of the art, top cutting edge security tool. We don't have to worry about security at all. It takes care of everything." And I said, "Hey, you know what? I'm just offering this for free. How about I come down to your office and check it out?" And they're like, "Oh sure, yeah, absolutely, we're happy to do that." And so I went there. They had this small little server room in there, and I said, "Do you mind if I take a look at it? I'd love to see this thing that allows you to never have to worry about security." And they were so proud. I was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. Just this way." So let me into the server room. I see it. I'm thinking to myself, I don't see any lights. No blinky stuff, right? Normally it's blinky stuff, right? And then so I went in behind, found the power cord, followed it down, and I picked it up, and it wasn't even plugged in. And the guy was with me, and he's like, "Did you unplug it?" I said, "No." I said, "How long has this thing been here?" And like, "Oh, we bought it 6 months ago." I was like, "So you paid $300,000 for essentially a very expensive paperweight?" And I said, "Hey," I said, "Look," I said, "Just as a matter of just showing you," I said, "Can I please bring in my digital forensics guy here? I'd love to be able to see if there's what's going on in your network." Well, not a super complicated network. I came in, took a look. About 3 months So about 3 months after, they were in that sense of security, there was a persistent cyber attack that took foot. And for 3 whole months, this cyber attacker was pilfering data, right? And this was, like I said, professional service firms. So they had a lot of sensitive data, many of which were for fairly high net worth people. And that personal data had been stolen. And they didn't have an effing clue about it, right? And the guy, when we showed him, went, I've never seen someone go that shade of pale before. Like, he was practically translucent. And I said, you know what? Here's what we do to help you, right? And when all of a sudden he said to me, I really appreciated that you didn't bullshit me. He said, I'm not a security person. He said, this security vendor called me one day and said, hey, we have this piece of technology, so you never have to worry about security again. He said, I heard that, and I thought, oh, what a great deal. He said, I'm not informed in terms of what to ask or what not to ask. I said, well, you keep me around that. Right? That's my goal as a fractional security leader, so I can help you call BS on your tech guys, on your tech vendors, right? So you know what risks are worth taking and what risks aren't, right? That's, like I said, one of the things that makes me most upset about the cyber industry over the past 2 decades is that it's gone from being a vendor landscape, which was only a handful of vendors, but they did serve the community, to where we are now, where there's a security startup coming out every 2 seconds, right? And they're all just trying to get acquired. They're all trying to make a quick buck. I would say that the vendor landscape has become very confusing, and the majority of vendors out there, they do not care about they don't really care about their customers. They care about meeting quarterly quota, right? And that's really, really sad.
That is a great story. But I mean, it's really important to close the loop, isn't it? This is something I go on about in the book as well. It's like, you have to make sure that you close the loop on all these things to make sure you've gone around the feedback loop and checked that the thing you thought was happening is happening. And they clearly had not even attempted to.
Absolutely. And again, same thing in which even just some basic procedural thinking. Like, again, I remember my parents telling me when I was a kid, remember, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no free ride here, right? And again, yes, maybe he did pay $300,000, but what that guy was essentially offering him was a free ride around security. And again, a little bit of critical thinking. And again, in anything, there is no silver bullet. There's no silver bullet to aging well. There's no silver bullet to becoming financially wealthy. There's no silver bullet to whatever. Again, some basic stuff that you don't need tech to detect that tech. You just need to have a critical mindset, right? And that's,
critical thinking.
I want to see more executives do is have more critical thinking around cyber.
All right. Well, that seems like a perfect note to end it on. Dom, this has been super in-depth conversation. You've done a great job here. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I look forward to chatting with you in the future. This has been great. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you, Rob. Let's do it again. I'm looking forward to it.